Hi there. I'm very privileged today to be speaking to Anne Gillis all the way from Canada. And today is another episode of Conversations with Elders, the Aephoria podcast that looks at what's happening in the world today, and in particular is interested in the Enneagram and vertical development for leaders and for society. So Anne, it's been so lovely to hear your yes to this conversation. Maybe just as we start, won't you tell everyone just a little bit more about yourself?
Okay, I live in Prince Edward Island, Canada, which is on the Atlantic coast, not far from our neighboring provinces are Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. Many people know Prince Edward Island because of the story Anne of Green Gables. So that's my home province. We're a small province, population of about 150,000, and we're still one province of the Canadian Federation. I've lived here most of my life, not all of it. I've done some travel, so pretty comfortable here in our little place in the world. And as you can perhaps observe, I'm well along in years, but still feel pretty young.
Yeah, absolutely. For the years that I've known you, Anne, you definitely have the spring of youth inside your heart.
Thanks.
And it's interesting that you mentioned Anne of Green Gables. That is such a beloved book. I remember absolutely falling in love with that book when I was a young girl. So that actually gives me some extra context for where you're at. So Anne, you have been in many ways for yourself and in your work and for your personal development and also just in life, been working with the Enneagram for quite a while. So I know people are often interested to just hear more about how you met the Enneagram and what the Enneagram's meant to you in terms of your own personal journey and development.
I met the Enneagram in 1990 through a work-related 2-week workshop. And during the workshop, there were 2 days spent on the Enneagram. I was working at the time with the Canadian federal government in the field of employer services, so trying to match employers with workers. And the approach of our trainers at that time had the belief that how can you help others if you don't know yourself? So that was the basis of spending 2 days on the Enneagram. That tweaked my interest considerably at the time. In about the same probably 6 or 12 month period, I met the Myers-Briggs type indicator. So meeting the two of them in the same time frame was a little bit like getting hit by, I'm not sure what. I was at the time quite a skeptic that any of this stuff made any sense. However, having spent that time with both of the systems, I became intrigued with both of them. The Enneagram was the one that really, I'll say, if we got into me, because it seemed to be, it could go to areas that I had not gone to and probably didn't want to go to, but it hit some nails, as we say, right on the head. And it intrigued me. In the 1990s, I had small children. I have a son and a daughter. So time to delve into lots of that stuff. I was reading more books about how to parent. However, if I'd read the Enneagram, I think I'd have been a much better parent to my kids. I think there's huge learnings in perhaps what not to do with others or what to do with ourselves. So I'd say to any parent of young children, go find some stuff related to the Enneagram, and it's not about them. It's about me. It's about you. At the same time, or probably sometime earlier in my life, in the early 1980s, I became a member of the Al-Anon program. So for those that don't know Al-Anon, it's for friends and families and of addicts, particularly alcoholism. So when I put the two of them together, and have done that for the last probably 30 years, the two of them put together have been extremely helpful. I can't separate. I can't say one's more valuable than the other, but learning about what makes me tick through the Enneagram lens has been, today I say, a total gift in my life, because I wake up each day as the person that I am, and then I have a choice to either stay in that place or choose some changes. And whatever I do today might not be helpful to tomorrow or yesterday, but between the two of them, it's been very helpful. I continue to go back to the Enneagram. I've met it several times formally, again through work. I ran into it, as they say, or it ran into me in around about 2000. A little bit harder, a little bit heavier, again through work. And at that time I was working with training others, so huge help in working with other people. And not using the Enneagram overtly, however, using it to work with others and work with the public, and trying to more particularly choose my own, make my own choices on a daily basis as to when I do that, I get into trouble. I get into trouble with my kids, I get into trouble with coworkers, get into trouble with a partner. You know, all of that still happens. It's just with the Enneagram, I can catch myself, you know, sort of catch myself in the act and say, that's not working. Or I continue in the compulsion. And I've worked, when I retired, my formal day job, I was trying to figure out what I would study, because I thought I'll go on and do maybe, you know, do things in reverse, go do my master's in something when I retired. But the thing that I chose to study was the Enneagram. So I've studied with various teachers over the years and have delved a little bit deeper in trying to grasp and understand what it is. And I the more I know, the more I don't know. I think the more I've learned, the more I realize I have so much more to learn. And the Enneagram informs, I guess, every day, because it lets me see the lens that I'm looking through, as opposed to the other, if we talk about the 9 different types, the other 9 lenses. And then it helps me decide when I don't want to do something, where do I find the courage to do it?
Yeah, it sounds like the Enneagram's been a very powerful companion to you in your journey. And I love that idea of like giving me the opportunity to see my compulsions. And it's almost like a decision mechanism. Am I going to continue down this road?
Oh, yes.
I love that way of framing and thinking about the Enneagram. And for those people that are watching and listening to this, I find it's often helpful to also listen through the lens of our own Enneagram styles to another person as they speak and share through their lens. So, Anne, you lead from Enneagram 2, am I correct?
That's correct. I'd say I'm a classic 2. And at one time I had done some of the questionnaires, had done some reading, and I was, you know, had things that sort of narrowed down to, you know, between a 9 and a 2. The peacemaker, the helper, depending on which lingo is used. And I was in a room at the time with Russ Hudson, one of the founders of the Enneagram Institute. And as Russ's practices, he had done the 8, the 9, the 1, and then we took a break. And I approached him and was saying, okay, how do you decide between, you know, I narrowed it down 9 and a 2. And he said, well, just listen, I'm going to talk about the 2 next. And he had only started in to talk about the 2 for about 3 minutes. And I knew I was a 2, right? There was no question. And it's that, the motivating force. Today I say it's like you've got 9 buses lined up and they all have different engines. We can't see the engines and they're all operating a little differently. So once I heard and the, what's the motivation? What drives me every day I wake up? And it's the 2. And it was as clear, there was no longer question. It can take a while for people to identify and get comfortable with the type, because of course, or many initially, we want to be something else because it's more attractive. However, because we see the good in the other and we sort of miss the not so good or the unpleasant. And lots of times we can be very hard on ourselves and find the negative without the positive. So I found the Enneagram as a system was, because of the circle and the movement, that I don't have to stay stuck in my 2-ness, but the 2s are, and when I put the 2 together of addiction, and in the addiction world, we'll hear the term codependency. The Enneagram very kindly says the 2s are the codependents of the world. So it's like, oh yeah, nailed it, right? Nailed it.
You're using the word kindly in a very ironic fashion though, but that is the thing about the Enneagram, right? Is sometimes it's like an arrow through the heart when you look in the mirror of
yes,
the system.
Yes, yeah. And I think back to when I first met the Enneagram, I certainly said to myself, and I may have said it out loud, and I've certainly said it out loud since, is how could a system know me better than I knew myself? And it's continued for me to be that way. And when I'm in denial, which we spend a good part of our life in denial, that the pattern of, what the Enneagram may identify as, these are the likely things that I've seen or done in my life. It's like, it's check mark, check mark, check mark. So it's like, okay, there's something here for me to pay attention to, even though I don't want to. Because there were lots of days I did not want to face what life was handling, what was handing out. And I did not want to face what the Enneagram had, written down in books or papers or on audio broadcasts or whatever. And then over time, I became curious, a little more learning about it. And then it's like, and then started to see what's the good. I've worked with I've worked with Insights Discovery. So was at one time certified in Insights Discovery. So I say, it doesn't matter which system you use. I encourage people, just find one that informs you, that you're willing to allow into your life and get curious, as opposed to most of us, the nature of humanity seems to be, let's deny it first. So we're really good at denial. It doesn't matter whether I deny it through the lens of a 2, or deny it through the lens of a 7 or a 3 or 5, doesn't matter. When we get inside ourselves, if we get truthful, we all understand what denial is. However, we don't know what it is when we first hear the word, because our first reaction is, well, no, I don't deny. However, in my experience, there's 9 ways of denying in the Enneagram world is, and we can go much deeper into beyond the 9 types, but we all have our own way. And I say these days, call it compulsion, call it denial, or I also say you can call it sky blue pink. It's still there. It's still there. Yeah. And others know it. Yeah.
sometimes they can see our patterns much clearer than we can. And I think this is one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you today, was to talk particularly about addiction. Um, and I mean, it's interesting because as part of this lockdown that we've been experiencing in different ways in different parts of the world, the South African lockdown until I think midnight tonight has involved a ban on the sale of alcohol and cigarettes, and has really put into frame the South African relationship with alcohol in so many ways. And we're well known as a nation of binge drinkers, and it's one of the ways in which we've kept the emergency wards clear for COVID-related patients. And yet, we've also had a very strong and thriving illicit economy in all of those things, and people dying from making their own alcohol because they can't wait 2 months for their next drink. And so the whole conversation with addiction, I think, is up for us as a nation on this part of the world. So I'm very interested in what concepts and ideas from your experience are really important when working with addiction in general, because I think it's not something we talk about much. And so sometimes it is part of our own process of denial, as you say, is to not talk about addiction. But I think we're seriously uninformed in many ways, and at least in our part of the world. And it has pretty big consequences.
There are, from my experience in the world of addiction, and that's why I say I can, addiction / compulsion, whatever it is, we all have an addiction or compulsion. The Enneagram helps point it out. There are different kinds of addictions or compulsions. Some of them are what we call ingested. This is from the work of Anne Wilson Schaef. Ingested, or that's where I met this language, ingested. So I put it in, alcohol, drugs, food, whatever we put in. And then another way of looking at it is our process addictions. So how might we, in a 12-step conversation, we might call that stinking thinking, and it is drop the G. Work, overwork. We have the term workaholic. So whatever we do to run away from what's really going on. And from my experience, it's not a matter of, do I have an addiction? It's, do I know which one, or how many do I have? And are they working for me, or are they working for those that I work or live with? As in the world of codependency, a lot of people were in, for some people, the addiction is just theirs, the food or drugs or alcohol or overwork. But also the compulsion for the Enneagram 2, for instance, the codependence of the world, is to the relationship, whether it's at work or at home. And with the Enneagram, I like it because of the movement. I don't stay in my two-ness all day. It's perhaps what I call my wellspring, but I move next door to my others, and I move across the lines. So I can sort of see my day, especially in retrospect, of when I, as we say, descended to something or rose to the occasion and found the challenge. But from an addiction issue, and because the Enneagram, we go back, in deeper study of the Enneagram, we were pretty well formed as to who we were, by the age of 5 or 6. So what did we figure out that we had to do? And then as we move through life, and it's I do this because I clench my fists because I want to hang on, because I want to hang on to whatever that is. And in the 12-step program or any others, it's, we're invited to let it go. Let it go. So am I hanging on, or am I letting it go? And in the movement in between, because that's what it is on a day-to-day basis. Because just because if I had a good day yesterday doesn't mean I have a good day today. Or if I was doing okay 5 minutes ago, it doesn't mean that I don't descend into something, And then how do I find myself again? How do I get, we might say, how do I get healthy? What do I need to work on? I like the Enneagram because from an addiction perspective, and maybe this is more philosophical than other, but what do I need to work on? I don't have to guess. The Enneagram helps me say, and if I'm being really truthful, I can say, oh my goodness, yes, that's been a problem for 50 or 55 or 60 years. And from just on COVID conversation, in our province, our chief medical health officer closed our main liquor stores. And that lasted a very short time because the hue and cry was massive. So that decision was changed. And recognizing that for those that need alcohol, to put them into a quick withdrawal was very dangerous. And the medical system could not deal with that. So that, I can't speak with good information on that, but that decision was changed very quickly.
I really appreciate that framing of some of the patterns that we need to work on as addictions, in part because it changes the relationship we have with our own development. Now, I've worked with quite a number of people who have this idea of, I've ticked my development off the list. I've done it. I went on a course, I had a conversation, I went for 5 therapy sessions, it's done. Whereas, as we know in the world of addiction is a lifelong journey and struggle. And so if I notice that these patterns, these compulsions that I work with when we talk about process addictions are really just the same as ingested addictions, then that idea and that notion of it's done, it's ticked off the list, is completely swept off the table. And we're in a more of a long-term conversation, which is, for me, in my own experience, in my own life, and with the clients that I work with, a lot more of an honest conversation in so many ways.
That brings to mind a conversation I had with, in the last 10 years of my formal working life, and I was working with the Canadian federal government in the world of helping develop middle managers. And one of our facilitator people said, I go into these organizations, I deliver this, sort of bang up 2-day workshop. Everybody's just great. Everybody's smiling, leaving, saying, oh, I learned so much and blah, blah, blah. And then he says, he said to me, 6 months later, things are back to the same way. And I said to him, well, you need to look through the lens of addiction. And he looked at me like I had 3 heads. And this was a man in his, at that point in time, probably 60, 61, 2 years of age. What do you mean? What are you talking about? And I said, well, unless organizations deal with addictive behavior, which we all have, by the way, or unless, if I'm part of a work team, what are the things I need to deal with? And there's always a compulsion of some sort that needs to be uncovered or opened up if the person is willing to do that. Sometimes the workplace is the absolute best place to identify that. But if we as organizations operate and think we can ask people to change either behaviors or beliefs without coming to a conversation on what is my compulsion, like if nothing changes, nothing changes, because that change has to come from within. If you're my supervisor and you say, you give me some feedback, and I say, oh yes, I can change that. And then 3 months later, I'm back to the same behavior or the same attitude or approach. If I don't get at the real core issue, name it, claim it, choose it, change it, right? Only if I name it can I claim it. Only if I claim it can I choose to change it. So organizationally, we deliver 2-day lovely workshops, blah, blah, blah. And most people, it's surface work, unless you get something like I got in 1990 that hit me in my, you can say it hit me in my gut, it hit me in my head, and it hit me in my heart. The Enneagram, the 3 core places. And I think organizationally, there was a book written by, again, Anne Wilson Schaaf called The Addictive Organization. It was published back in the probably mid-1980s. And it's basically who shows up for work. Individuals. It's not organizations. Organizations don't exist without individuals. So if we bring in 9 people and they're all operating at a non-healthy level, we cannot possibly have a healthy organization. It's just not possible. If we're willing to work on ourselves and then work collectively, there's hope. If we stay stuck in our compulsions, we may do great things for a period of time, but eventually there'll be a switch. Because it can't, in my experience, it can't go on endlessly without the compulsion showing up. Yeah. And if we're not working at it, it's just going to make us sicker and sicker and sicker, body, mind, and heart, right?
Absolutely. And I think in many ways, the collective downward gravitational pull of the pandemic and the amount of anxiety and uncertainty people have been dealing with has pushed people into closer relationship with their compulsions.
Oh yes.
In many ways. And I know that during the pandemic, there's been extensive and really important work done in the addiction community with circles running 24/7 as well, to help people who have named and claimed addiction. And yet, as you say, we all have addictions, and because we don't claim it, we're not working with it. And so actually we all need to be in 24/7 circles. Yep. To face up to those compulsions in some way. A question for you, Anne, around your own journey with codependence. What are some of the personal lessons that you've learned that have helped you in facing that compulsion in yourself? What are some of your biggest lessons on codependence?
Seeing how, I guess for me, it continues to show up in my life. I say I'm the type of person, and I think many of the 2s from the Enneagram I wake up thinking about other people. How can I help? How can I help? The codependents of the world tend to, in the Enneagram, I say, lays this out in, clear language. We put ourselves last constantly. We're taking care of business, right? We're taking care of kids, partners, family members, co-workers, bosses, subordinates, the world. Until we aren't, until we can't, until we get exhausted and we get all kinds of negative thoughts and feelings. So realizing that, how do I stay healthy, and what do I need to do? So the codependents are, if you will, what's our addiction? Our addiction is in some language called relationship addiction, because we put others' needs first. And as long as we attend to everybody else, I don't have to deal with me, because I'm too busy dealing with, everybody in my circle. And eventually we get burned out, we get angry, we get resentful, we get all those things. And there's probably, as with the Enneagram, it lets us see there's a 2 in sort of everybody. So it doesn't mean just the 2s, but are going to be the codependents of the world. But we're the biggies, in the sense that, if you get a bunch of 2s into a group, as you say, into a circle, if you get a bunch of 2s, there'll be a lot of nodding of the heads. And then there are others that don't wake up that way. They don't wake up thinking of others. They wake up thinking about what they're going to do, which often doesn't involve other people, or doesn't have to. Whereas the codependents, there's always at least one other person involved in their thinking process. This is just my experience. And everybody, in my observation, has an element of a 2, or the caretaker, or the helper, or the codependent. Another word that may be used is the enabler. So we enable others to carry on. And it's really important from a codependent conversation, because lots of times when we're talking about alcoholism or drug addiction, we'll often hear the concept of, well, we need to, an alcoholic has to hit their bottom. And then there's the concept that, yes, an alcoholic perhaps has to hit bottom. However, a codependent can enable that time to go on much longer than is needed. So the education of codependency is that if we stop doing certain things, then the alcoholic may be able to hit their bottom quicker. And that's important for recovery. But as long as we keep doing what we're doing in a negative context, and we keep helping the alcoholic avoid coming to terms with life, then we're a major player in prolonging what does not have to be prolonged. That was a huge, in my experience, that was a huge piece of learning. So then, okay, what do I need to do to stop my enabling? And the whole world, like I say, the whole world has this issue. So how do I stop it? How do I stop myself? How do I get others to stop it? And it's a bit of a challenge. I used to, I have the line, I will stop doing something when you start. So as long as you don't start, I'm never going to stop. So the way it needs to be, from my perspective, is I will stop doing something in order to allow you to pick up your responsibility. And the reality is there may be a gap. And I have to be prepared to allow that gap to happen. If one of the things I learned early in Al-Anon, if you're going to make a threat, be prepared to carry it out. Because the codependents or the enablers of the world will make threats and will not hold to them. And that's a problem. And that's the prolonging of someone else coming to terms with their issues. And whether the person, as you mentioned, whether it's binge drinking, daily drinking, only drink on Fridays, whatever the model is, that does not determine, let's say, the alcoholism, right? There's all kinds of different models. And there's a very small percentage that we would call alcoholics, much smaller what we think might be an alcoholic as opposed to what really is an alcoholic, because we're choosing to ingest a substance that satisfies some sort of need. And the pain that, it's dealing with pain and dealing with fear. In the pandemic, there's another book by Anne Gillis titled When Society Becomes an Addict. So the addiction of society and the having been pushed into this, in some cases we've chosen, and we've also been pushed into fear. And I've said in our area, I've said, it's like someone put the Kool-Aid out in March and we've been drinking it ever since. So how do I deal with my fear of tomorrow when I'm not in tomorrow? The 12-step programs have an expression, plan the event, just don't plan the outcome. So we can plan for our medical system to deal with stuff. However, if we're living in the future of, if we're already in tomorrow when we're only in today, that's part of, for me, that's part of the addictive cycle. Because my Russ Hudson of the Enneagram Institute says aloud, can you breathe in tomorrow, or can you breathe in like a minute from now? Or can you breathe, like right now, can you breathe in yesterday, or can you breathe in a minute ago? So it seems we're being pushed to the future when we've only got today. So I think in the pandemic conversation, we have a huge pandemic of fear. And I think that comes from our natural human compulsion practice to not live in the day. And that's what many in the addiction world know. You really, if you're really working to stay in the day, that's all we can do. And that it doesn't matter whether it's an ingested addiction or my thinking addiction, because that's where I get into trouble, is in my thinking addiction, or my thinking compulsion. It's with me every day.
Wherever we go, there we are.
There I am, right?
And it is, I think this really is part of the invitation of this time, is for us to expand our capacity for anxiety and being in anxiety, because the compulsions try to get us out of the anxiety. But life is anxiety, full of anxiety, whether we're talking about normal life, whatever that is, or now in the pandemic. I mean, the moment I'm born, I start dying, and that's the only certainty I live with. That's such
right.
an anxiety-provoking way of being in the world. So if we can all expand our capacity to be in the moment, despite or next to or with our anxiety, instead of using our compulsions to in some way try and pretend that anxiety and fear isn't there, then we can all be healthier.
And it's working with that compulsion. And it's accept, the serenity prayer, accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can and the wisdom to know the difference. So it's once I've named my compulsion or compulsions, then I actually have something to work with. When we talk about my area of development, if I'm trying to work on everything, it's too much. However, if I can narrow it down and say, oh, this is my primary thing that I want to work on, acknowledging that there's other stuff going on, but it's and accepting that that's with us pretty well every day. That's why in 12-step conversations we don't talk about, or most people do not talk about recovered. They talk about recovering, because it's with me all the time.
Yeah.
You don't, it's like the workshop. Oh, I attended that, check mark, right? Mm. Well, guess what? We keep showing up in our own life, and whatever's inside us will surface again. It's like a bubbling spring. Keeps bubbling.
Keeps bubbling. And so, wow, Anne, you have shared so much wisdom with us today. I know my thoughts are definitely, I'm deeply provoked in a way that I think will help me to also work with some of my own compulsions. And so, yes, thank you so much for the generosity of your time and spirit. And as we close off this conversation, any last thoughts or ideas that you'd like to share with the people that will be watching and listening to this podcast?
I think it's the invitation to, step into the water. And if anybody listening or watching finds themselves in denial, don't be afraid of, stepping into the water. There's a fascinating person to get to know in whatever form. And whatever you do or choose, it's not forever. You can change your mind in a minute or in 5 minutes. It's like it's working to stay in that moment. And yes, you can plan the future. Just be careful about trying to live into the future. And it's never too late to do any of this work, and have some fun getting to know yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you for that beautiful invitation. It's never too late. Get through the denial and step into the water. Thank you for your wisdom today.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity.